we can look at, since we're talking about BBM Marcos, his father was a master of the dance. Let's call that. Why do I say this as regards to China? You know, if we remember, Marcos opened the relations with China even before the US did, right? So on one hand, he was opening his arms to China and open not only with China but also with Russia and with Libya and so on. On the other hand, he's the first to put in our laws a claim on the sprat lease. No, in 1978, he put two laws for the economic zones and for the territory. So on one hand, it's like dancing with somebody, and on the other hand, you're pickpocketing, right? And we had perfectly good relations. So that's a true diplomat and a true politician. And we had excellent relations with China at that time. So second, how for what reason would China be interested in invading the Philippines? There is no interest in invasion of the Philippines, but the Philippines may become a target for different reasons. Why is there no interest in the Philippines? Because if we look at the entire Philippine, if we look at it from an economic basis, the entire Philippine productive capacity, about $370 billion GDP a year, no, is less than one half of 1 year's growth, because China's growth at 6% of a $14 trillion economy, 13, 14 trillion. We're talking about $800 billion a year growth, $800 billion a year growth. So our entire economy is sunk into just one half of a year's growth. For what reason would they risk their entire reputation and have to go through war to take over the Philippines? But there is a reason to possibly attack and invade the Philippines is actually defensive rather than offensive. If we remember, they did not start building on those islands the military capability until the Philippines started saying publicly, very publicly, that they would invite the US to come in and defend those territories against China. Now, it makes it impossible for China politicians not to react to that, because there are people who say you are going to allow the US to come in and tighten the ring noose around us, because the US has already stated that its objective is to keep tightening the ring around China. And so if we have 6 EDCA bases here and negotiating for more, and now there are all these missiles, they have to get at those missiles and attack before they reach maximum velocity. So anyone who understands military will understand that. So they have to be there, whereas they were not there before. If the US is saying that they did not protest before, that is not the case. They have been sending letters and representations and were being ignored by the US and the West, just the same as the Russian proposal to just consider mutuality of security was totally ignored by the US and the EU. Why don't you just agenda it and put it on record? They refused. No, so that is we have to see. In fact, the OSCE, the Organization for Security of Europe, European Community, has agreed in principle many years ago that you cannot enhance the security of one party without considering mutual security of all the parties. And that is what they did. So we have to understand that today, especially for powers, you cannot try to enhance your security at my expense. They will react. In fact, this is also the US policy. They are disallowing, in fact, they've sanctioned Cuba, who is totally no threat to the US for how many decades, and crushed the economy of Cuba. And they're trying to do that to Venezuela, but they're not allowing any other country to recognize. In fact, China's stated by Bobby, the resolutions they had on the majority of their territorial disputes, you know, depending on the statistics, 17 out of 23 or 23 out of 27, the majority of them have been giving a more favorable terms to the third party. So right now, there was an agreement in principle that we will take the do the development of the resources in the South China Sea together, and the US and the Western companies were giving the Philippines only 10% of the benefit, and we're not paying taxes on it. And China was willing to give 60%, and that 60% presumably already covers taxes. But when it came to Locsin DFA, then he insisted that they have to recognize our sovereignty. The effect, we were supposed, the from the beginning, the agreement was not to discuss sovereignty and just benefit from it together. So there are all these issues. So these are what we need to strengthen our defense. Yes, we could be a target, but not because they want to invade us, but because they need to defend themselves against this tightening ring. And we should strengthen our defense, not just against China, but for all purposes about protecting our economic as well as political issues from all parties. Why are we not talking about Sabah, which is actual territory with all these borders and around the territorial seas, 10 producing oil wells, gold, tin, mining, forestry, and then we're going to fight over water. So this is just to put in perspective this issue about they keep saying China will attack the Philippines. There's, they have to point out what's the basis, no? And how this can be managed. In fact, China had given up over 1 million square kilometers or miles of territory of Mongolia just to give a buffer zone between Russia and China, and they're respecting it.
Yeah, I think thank you to all our speakers for responding extensively to that question. I think that question is very important, no? Especially to clarify the issue that there's such a thing as an impending threat coming from the Chinese, and it's being used to justify certain. I think I read one article. One senator of the country is speaking about this. I think this is very important issue that such webinar is important, to clarify and to educate our public.